When 11 altar boys disappeared from St. Jude's Parish in 1980, the community was left with a devastating unsolved tragedy. Their story was seemingly finalized by the death of their priest, Father Vasile, who was killed in an accident just months after they were gone. But 26 years later, federal agents followed a cryptic tip to the priest's grave, expecting to unearth a clue. Instead, they found a casket containing nothing but a tattered shroud. Analysis of the corrosion proved the seal had been intact since 1980, which meant there was never a body inside. The empty grave proved the priest's death was a deliberate lie, designed not just to hide a man, but to end the search for the 11 boys forever. The artifact dealer's sweat smelled like cheap cologne and desperation, a scent Cole Pasco knew intimately. He ignored it, maintaining his carefully constructed persona, a mid-level buyer for clients who valued discretion above provenance. He was in a humid warehouse near the Philadelphia docks, the air thick with the scent of brine and rusting metal. Before him, resting on a velvet cloth that had seen better days, sat a crucifix, supposedly salvaged from a 16th-century Spanish monastery. "It is blessed," the dealer, a man named Varga, insisted, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already damp. "My contacts took great risks." Cole leaned in, examining the patina. It was a decent forgery, aged with chemicals and expertly distressed, but the tooling marks near the base were distinctly modern. "The blessing is secondary to the craftsmanship, Mr. Varga." Cole kept his voice low, calm, projecting the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to handling illicit goods. Outside the warehouse, an FBI tactical team was in position, listening to every word, waiting for his signal. This sting had been 6 months in the making, aimed at crippling a trafficking ring that laundered money through stolen and forged religious artifacts. It was a niche Cole understood, a world where faith and greed intersected. He was about to utter the code phrase, "The craftsmanship is acceptable," when the concealed bone conduction earpiece behind his ear vibrated with sudden urgency. "Pasco, abort! Now!" The voice of his supervisor, Jonas Bridger, was clipped, devoid of its usual dry humor. Cole froze, his fingers millimeters from the crucifix. Abort? They were seconds away, and the timing couldn't be worse. He turned slightly, pretending to examine the light, masking the movement of his lips. "Negative, Jonas." "I'm at the exchange point. The package is here. Repeat, the package is here." "I said abort, Cole. Pull your team and get out. We have a situation. Priority Alpha." "Jonas, this is Varga. We get him. We get the network." Cole felt a spike of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the sting. Jonas wouldn't pull him, not on a Priority Alpha, unless it was catastrophic. A bombing threat, an active shooter. "This takes priority," Jonas snapped, the tension in his voice palpable now. "Saint. Jude's 11. We got a warrant. We're opening Father Vasile's grave." The name hit Cole like a physical blow, the air rushing out of his lungs. St. Jude's 11 wasn't just a case file, it was a local legend, a nightmare whispered in the pews of his own childhood parish. 11 altar boys vanished in 1980, a tragedy that had hollowed out a community, leaving behind a void of unanswered questions and endless grief. Father Theron Vasile, their charismatic priest, had died in a car accident just 4 months later, compounding the tragedy. The case had gone cold before Cole had even graduated high school. He looked back at Varga, who was watching him with sudden, nervous suspicion. The sting, the months of work, the forged crucifix, it all dissolved instantly, replaced by the ghosts of 1980. "Something is wrong?" Varga asked, his hand twitching toward his jacket pocket. "The light," Cole said, stepping back, his eyes sweeping the warehouse, recalculating his exit strategy. "The light is all wrong." He gave the abort signal, a subtle gesture with his left hand. He was out of the warehouse before the tactical team stormed the front, prioritizing a clean exit over a messy arrest. Varga would have to wait because the past was screaming for attention. The drive to the rural Pennsylvania cemetery associated with St. Jude's Parish was a blur of sirens and rain-slicked roads. Cole changed out of his undercover attire in the back of a mobilization van, pulling on the familiar weight of his FBI tactical vest. The anonymous tip that had spurred the exhumation warrant was thin. A cryptic letter claiming the priest's death was connected to the disappearance. But it was enough to convince a judge who remembered the original horror, who understood the weight of the unanswered questions. He arrived at the cemetery late in the afternoon. The scene was chaotic, a jarring intrusion on the quiet sanctity of the place. Floodlights pushed back the gloom of an overcast sky, casting long, distorted shadows among the tilting headstones. Local police had established a perimeter, their faces grim, their posture tense. The core of the activity was centralized around a freshly disturbed patch of earth. A backhoe sat idle nearby, looking like a prehistoric beast resting after its work, its metal jaws coated in dark soil. Jonas Bridger was waiting for him, his face a mask of professional detachment, but Cole could see the strain around his eyes. "Thanks for getting here, Cole. Sorry about the sting." "What's happening?" Cole asked, his eyes drawn to the activity, the mound of earth, the rectangular hole in the ground. "They just got it clear of the vault," Jonas said. "The ground was hard, took longer than expected." Cole moved closer. The air here smelled different. Damp earth, decay, and something metallic, something cold. A forensic team was guiding the chains, lifting the casket from the ground. It was a sight Cole had witnessed before, the solemn ritual of exhumation, but this one felt different, heavier, more charged with anticipation. The casket emerged from the earth, dripping mud and water. It was immediately clear this burial was old. The metal was in an advanced state of decay, with no polished mahogany or gleaming brass. Instead, the entire exterior was covered in a thick layer of mottled reddish-brown rust. It looked less like a vessel of rest and more like something salvaged from a shipwreck. The corrosion was deep, pitting the metal, threatening the integrity of the structure. 26 years underground, a forensic tech murmured, the sound barely audible over the rumble of the generator. They lowered it onto heavy-duty trestles set up beside the open grave. The rectangular hole in the ground looked impossibly dark, a void waiting to be filled. Cole stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the disturbed soil. The forensic team began the arduous process of opening the lid. The hinges were nearly fused with rust, so they used crowbars and specialized spreading tools, the sound of screeching metal setting everyone's teeth on edge. It was a violation, a necessary desecration. There was a collective intake of breath as the lid finally gave way, the seal breaking with a sharp crack. Cole positioned himself at the head of the casket, shining his tactical flashlight into the interior. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the contents. The lining, which might have once been white satin, was now a tattered and discolored shroud, shredded, stained with dirt and the dark fluids of decomposition, crumpled in a heap at the bottom. But that was all. Cole swept the beam left, then right, the light reflecting off the rusted metal. There were no bones, no skull, no clothing remnants beyond the shroud itself. The coffin was completely empty. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. The forensic team looked at each other, their professional detachment dissolving into stunned disbelief, then at Cole. Jonas swore under his breath, a harsh sound in the stillness. Grave robbing? Body snatching? But the rust, the intact seal, argued against it. The casket hadn't been disturbed since the day it was buried. Cole stared into the rusted void, the implications crashing down on him. This wasn't just about the missing boys anymore. This was about a deception that had lasted decades, a lie perpetuated by the very institutions they were sworn to trust. If Father Theron Vasile wasn't buried here, a terrifying question opened up, a question that demanded an answer. Where had he been for the last 26 years? And what else had he been doing? The immediate aftermath of the discovery was a controlled chaos. Cole, galvanized by the shock, quickly asserted control over the scene. "Lock it down," he ordered, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This entire cemetery is now a federal crime scene. I want every inch of this area documented, photographed, and processed, and I want the casket transported to Quantico, sealed and secured." The implications of the empty casket were staggering. It wasn't just a matter of a missing body. It was the erasure of an established fact. Father Vasile was dead. The record said so, the diocese said so, and the community believed it. "Grave robbing," one of the local detectives suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Maybe some satanic panic stuff back in the 80s? A ritual? Cole shook his head, pointing to the rusted seal where the lid had met the base. He had examined it closely before the forensic team broke it open. "Look at the corrosion patterns, the oxidation. This hasn't been opened since the day it was interred. The seal was intact. If someone took the body, they did it before it was buried. Or more likely, there was never a body to begin with." Jonas Bridger stood beside him, staring at the tattered shroud, the empty space where a man of God should have been resting. So the funeral was a sham, a closed casket for an empty box. That requires coordination, complicity. Who authorized that? The empty grave didn't just deepen the mystery of Vasile's death, it forced the immediate reopening of the saint. Jude's 11 investigation, the connection implied by the anonymous tip, previously dismissed as a long shot, suddenly felt concrete, terrifying. Jonas assigned Cole as the lead agent. It was a logical choice. Cole knew the area, the culture. And as Jonas knew, Cole was a practicing Catholic. This case resonated in a way others didn't. It felt like a violation of sacred ground, both literally and metaphorically, a betrayal that struck at the heart of his own faith. The next day, Cole drove to St. Jude's Parish. The church itself was a modest stone structure, built in the early 20th century. It looked smaller than he remembered, the steeple reaching towards the gray sky like a desperate prayer. He walked through the sanctuary, the silence heavy, the air smelling of old incense and lemon polish. He remembered the panic of 1980, the way the community had turned inward, suspicion coloring every interaction before grief settled over them like a suffocating blanket. He found the parish hall, a multi-purpose room used for meetings and Sunday school. This was the room where the infamous photograph had been taken, the photo that had run in every newspaper in the state after the disappearance. It wasn't displayed publicly anymore, but Cole had seen it in the cold case file dozens of times. He pulled the file from his briefcase and opened it to the photograph. The image had a distinct vintage quality, the colors warm and slightly faded, a yellowish tint common to aged prints. He studied the faces. At the center stood Father Theron Vasile, 37 years old in the photo. Dark, neatly combed hair, a serious, composed expression. He wore the traditional black cassock and crisp white clerical collar. His hands were pressed together in front of his chest in a gesture of prayer. Surrounding him were the 11 boys. They were all dressed identically, vibrant red cassocks covered by white, billowy surplices. The contrast was stark, the red symbolizing the blood of the martyrs, the white, the purity of the soul. They ranged in age from 11 to 14, and all mimicked the priest's pose, hands held together, solemn, disciplined, trusting. Cole looked at the wall behind them in the photo. 2 crosses were visible. He looked up at the actual wall in the parish hall. It had been repainted years ago, but the hooks were still there. The room felt cold, despite the summer heat outside. The ghosts of the past lingered here, their presence palpable. He needed to talk to the families. Most had moved away over the decades, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. But one remained, Roisin Gabler. She had lost 2 sons, Dalen, 14, and Eamon, 12. Roisin lived in the same small house she had shared with her boys. Cole parked across the street, observing the property. It was meticulously maintained, the lawn edged perfectly, the paint fresh. But it felt static, frozen, a monument to a life interrupted. He approached the door and knocked. Roisin Gabler opened it moments later. She was in her late 50s now, her hair graying, her face etched with lines of grief that time had failed to soften. Her eyes were sharp, wary, the eyes of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and survived. Special Agent Pasco, Cole introduced himself, showing his credentials. FBI. It's about Dalen and Eamon. Roisin didn't move. I know who you are. I heard about the cemetery. Her voice was steady, but Cole could hear the exhaustion beneath it, the decades of unanswered questions. So, you finally decided to look again. May I come in? She hesitated, then stepped back, allowing him entry. The interior of the house was as immaculate as the exterior. It looked like a museum exhibit of 1980, the furniture, the decor, even the appliances. In the living room, photographs of her sons dominated the mantelpiece. Dalen, serious and protective. Eamon, impish and bright. What does the empty grave mean? Roisin asked, motioning for him to sit, though she remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. We don't know yet, Cole admitted. It suggests Father Vasile's death may not have been what it appeared. Roisin scoffed softly, a sound devoid of humor. Appeared? Nothing was what it appeared back then. Mrs. Gabler, I know the original investigation failed you. I've read the files. Failed? Her eyes flashed with a sudden fire. They barely tried. They said the boys ran away. 11 boys, all at once, leaving everything behind? It was easier than facing the truth. What truth? Cole asked, leaning forward. That something was wrong in that parish, she said, her voice tightening, the words tumbling out as if released from a dam of silence. With him. Father Vasile. This was new. The original case files painted Vasile as a victim, a beloved priest heartbroken by the loss of his flock, a man driven to despair and ultimately death. What was wrong with him? Cole pressed gently. Roisin walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street, her back rigid. He was too charismatic, too intense. The boys worshipped him. They spent all their time at the church. The altar server group, it became exclusive. A clique. He isolated them. Isolated them how? He'd hold special meetings, retreats just for them. He told them they were chosen, that they had a higher purpose. It felt manipulative. It felt like grooming. I tried to pull Dalen and Eamon out, but they resisted. They said I didn't understand. Vasile had convinced them that their loyalty to him, to the church, was more important than their loyalty to their own family. She turned back to Cole, her eyes burning with unshed tears. I told the police this in 1980. They dismissed me. They said I was grieving, looking for someone to blame. The community revered him. He was a saint in their eyes. After the boys disappeared, he was inconsolable. And then he died. Conveniently? Cole listened, absorbing the weight of her words. It was a chilling portrait of manipulation, subtle and insidious. But it was still circumstantial. It didn't explain how 11 boys could vanish without a trace, or how a priest could fake his own death. Did you ever see anything that suggested he was involved in their disappearance? Any suspicious behavior? Any unusual visitors? No, she admitted, the frustration evident in her voice. Nothing concrete, just a feeling. A mother's instinct that something was terribly wrong. That the man I trusted with my son's souls was the very person who destroyed them. She looked at Cole, her gaze piercing, demanding. You're here because you think he didn't die. If he's alive, Agent Pasco, if he took my boys, I need you to find him. I need you to bring him to justice. Cole left the house with a renewed sense of urgency. Roisin's account shifted the focus. Vasile was no longer just a footnote in the case. He was the center of it. The investigation had to start with the one event that seemed definitive, but now was anything but the death of the priest. He needed to understand how Vasily had managed to disappear and who had helped him. If the funeral was staged, the death had to be staged as well. Cole focused his attention on the circumstances surrounding Father Vasily's fatal accident. According to the 1980 police report, Vasily had been driving late at night on a remote winding road when he lost control of his vehicle and plunged into a steep ravine. The car had burst into flames on impact. It was a narrative that fit the circumstances, a tragic end to a tragic story. But now, viewed through the lens of the empty grave, it felt too neat, too convenient. 4 months after the disappearance, the central figure in the boys' lives dies tragically, effectively sealing the narrative, closing the case, and eliminating the possibility of further investigation. Cole drove out to the crash site. The road was still remote, cutting through dense woodland, the asphalt cracked and uneven. He found the spot indicated in the report. The ravine was steep, treacherous, the bottom obscured by thick foliage. He got out of the car and walked to the edge, looking down at the rocky creek bed below. He examined the terrain, comparing it to the decades-old crime scene photos. The skid marks were long gone, the vegetation reclaimed the scorched earth. But the geometry of the curve remained. It was a dangerous stretch of road, but not impossible to navigate. The report stated there were no witnesses, no other vehicles involved, a single vehicle accident in the dead of night. He hiked down into the ravine, his boots slipping on the loose shale. It was a difficult descent, the air cool and damp. At the bottom, he found the impact site. The remnants of the wreckage had been removed years ago, but he could still see the scars on the larger trees, the indentations in the soil. He tried to imagine the violence of the crash, the eruption of flames, the agonizing death of the priest. Something bothered him. The report emphasized the intensity of the fire, stating the body was burned beyond recognition. If you wanted to fake a death, a fiery crash was the perfect cover. It destroyed the evidence, made identification difficult, and created a narrative of tragic finality. He returned to the field office and pulled the autopsy report. It was surprisingly thin for such a traumatic event. The cause of death was listed as massive blunt force trauma and thermal injuries. But the details were vague, the language clinical and detached. The body was identified primarily through dental records. In 1980, DNA testing didn't exist. Dental records were the gold standard. But dental records could be falsified, manipulated, especially if the organization providing them was complicit in the deception. He needed to know who provided the records. The report indicated they came directly from the diocese, the same diocese that had buried an empty casket. Cole's next step was to track down the mortician who handled the funeral. The funeral home was still in operation, but the mortician from 1980, a man named Elroy Kincaid, had retired years ago. Cole found him living in an assisted living facility on the outskirts of town. Elroy was frail, his hands trembling with palsy, but his mind was sharp, his memory clear. He remembered Father Vasily's funeral vividly. It was an event that had marked the community, a collective outpouring of grief. It was a big affair, Elroy recounted, his voice papery, thin. The whole town turned out. The church was overflowing, but it was unusual, very unusual. Unusual how? Cole asked, sitting opposite him in the brightly lit common room. The diocese took control of everything. Usually the family handles the arrangements. Vasily didn't have any local family, so it made sense on the surface, but they were very insistent on certain things, very controlling. Like what? The closed casket, Elroy said immediately. They said the injuries were too severe, the body too damaged. That was common enough in cases of fire, but they were adamant. No viewing, not even for the senior clergy. They wanted the casket sealed immediately. Cole leaned forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. Mr. Kincaid, did you prepare the body? Did you embalm the remains? Elroy hesitated, his eyes darting nervously toward the door of his room. He lowered his voice, leaning closer to Cole. That's the thing, Agent Pascoe. I didn't. Cole felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Explain. The body was brought to my funeral home directly from the county morgue, but it arrived in a sealed disaster pouch, heavy-duty, military grade. I was instructed not to open it, not to verify the contents. Who instructed you? 2 officials from the diocese. High-ranking men. I don't remember their names. They were older, powerful figures. They said the condition of the remains was so distressing they wanted to spare everyone the trauma. They even oversaw the placement of the pouch into the casket. They sealed it themselves. So you never actually saw the body? You never confirmed the identity of the deceased? Elroy shook his head, the shame evident on his face. No. I just handled the logistics, the service, the burial. He paused, his voice trembling slightly. It always bothered me. It felt wrong. A priest deserves the final rites, the proper preparation, the respect. But they were powerful men. I was young, starting out. I didn't dare question them. I didn't dare defy the diocese. The admission was staggering. It confirmed Cole's suspicion. The diocese had orchestrated the cover-up. They had buried an empty casket, or at least one that didn't contain Father Vasile. The question now was why? Were they protecting the church from scandal, or were they protecting Vasile? Were they victims of the deception or willing participants? Cole decided to confront the diocese directly. He scheduled a meeting with the current bishop, a man named Thaddeus O'Malley. The diocesan headquarters was an imposing building, all marble and stained glass, projecting an aura of power and authority. The atmosphere was hushed, reverential. Cole was ushered into the bishop's office. Bishop O'Malley was a stout man with a politician's smile, but his eyes were cold, calculating. He greeted Cole with a practiced warmth, a facade of cooperation. "Agent Pasco," the bishop greeted him, motioning to a plush leather chair. "I understand the FBI has taken a renewed interest in the saint, Jude's tragedy, a dark chapter in our history." "We have reopened the investigation," Cole said, remaining standing, refusing to be intimidated by the opulent surroundings. "We exhumed Father Vasile's grave." It was empty. The bishop's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He recovered quickly, his expression shifting to one of concerned surprise. "I heard?" "A disturbing development. Grave robbing is a heinous crime, a sacrilege." "We believe the body was never in the casket," Cole countered, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We believe the funeral was staged, and we have evidence suggesting the diocese was involved." The bishop steepled his fingers, his expression hardening. "That is a serious accusation, Agent Pasco, one that could cause great distress to the faithful and irreparable damage to the reputation of the church." "I interviewed the mortician," Cole continued, pressing the advantage. He stated that diocese officials instructed him not to open the disaster pouch containing the remains. They oversaw the burial of a sealed container. They orchestrated the deception. Bishop O'Malley stood, his face flushed with indignation. "The church has procedures for dealing with traumatic deaths. The priority is always the dignity of the deceased and the spiritual well-being of the community. I cannot speak to the decisions made by my predecessors, but I assure you, the diocese acted in good faith." "I need the names of the officials who managed the funeral," Cole demanded, "and I need the original dental records used to identify the body. The records that were supposedly provided by the diocese." Bishop O'Malley shook his head, his refusal absolute. "Those are confidential church records, protected by canonical law. I will not release them. I will not allow the FBI to conduct a fishing expedition based on speculation and the ramblings of a retired mortician." "This is a federal investigation," Cole argued, his voice rising in frustration. "A potential kidnapping and murder conspiracy. 11 boys are missing." "And this is a diocese," the bishop retorted, his voice cold as steel. "We will not be intimidated. The potential for scandal here is immense. You are treading on sacred ground, Agent Pasco. I suggest you proceed with extreme caution. The church will protect its own. The meeting ended with the bishop refusing to cooperate. The obstruction was blatant, the cover-up continuing even after 26 years. Cole left the diocesan headquarters with the certainty that the church was hiding something significant. The death was staged, the funeral was a lie. But who had the power to orchestrate such a vast conspiracy, and why? And where did the anonymous tip fit into all this? He needed to find the source of that letter, the person who knew the truth, the person who had finally broken the silence. The diocese was a wall of stone and silence. Cole knew that obtaining a subpoena for church records would be a protracted legal battle, one that the diocese, with its vast resources and influence, was well equipped to fight. He didn't have time for that. He needed a break, a crack in the foundation. The anonymous tipster was that weakness. The tip had been mailed, a handwritten letter sent to the FBI field office. The envelope was generic, the postmark local. The language of the letter was cryptic, but it contained specific details about the burial that suggested the sender had first-hand knowledge. They knew the casket was empty before the FBI did. Cole reviewed the letter again, analyzing the handwriting, the phrasing, the tone. The shepherd did not fall. He left the flock to the wolves. Look to the earth, but you will find no bones. The silence was bought. The phrasing suggested someone familiar with the cemetery's operations, someone who might have been present at the burial. Cole started investigating the cemetery staff from 1980. The records were sparse, kept in a dusty ledger at the cemetery office. Most of the staff from that era were deceased. But one name stood out: Jory Lasco. Lasco had been the primary groundskeeper at St. Jude Cemetery for over 30 years. He had retired abruptly 5 years ago. Cole checked the employment records. Jory had been working the day of Vasile's burial. He was the one who operated the backhoe, the one who lowered the casket into the ground. Locating Jory proved difficult. He had sold his house after retirement and seemingly disappeared. There were no forwarding addresses, no DMV records. Cole ran a financial check and found minimal activity, suggesting Jory was living off the grid, intentionally hidden. Cole expanded his search, looking for relatives, associates, anyone who might know where he was. He found a nephew living in a neighboring county. The nephew was initially reluctant to talk, claiming he hadn't seen his uncle in years. But Cole persuaded him, emphasizing the gravity of the situation, the possibility that Jory might be a material witness in a federal investigation. The nephew finally admitted that Jory was living in a secluded cabin in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. He gave Cole the coordinates. The drive to the cabin was long, the paved road giving way to gravel, then dirt. The area was remote, heavily wooded, the silence absolute. Cole felt a sense of unease as he approached the cabin. It was small, rustic, smoke curling from the chimney. He parked his vehicle a distance away and approached on foot. He observed the cabin for several minutes, scanning the surroundings, looking for any signs of surveillance. Jory Lasco emerged, carrying an axe. He was in his 60s but looked older, frail, gaunt, his movements slow and deliberate. He moved with a hesitancy that suggested paranoia, his eyes darting nervously around the clearing. Cole stepped out of the tree line, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Jory Lasco?" Jory spun around, dropping the axe, his eyes wide with fear. He stumbled back toward the cabin, reaching for the door. "I'm Special Agent Pasco, FBI," Cole called out, his voice calm, reassuring. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to talk about the letter." Jory stopped at the door, his hand trembling on the knob. "I didn't send any letter. I don't know what you're talking about." "The letter about Father Vasile," Cole pressed, moving closer. "About the empty grave. You knew, Jory. You knew it was empty." Jory looked away, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Cole could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, fear battling guilt, the weight of the secret crushing him. Mr. Lasco, we reopened the investigation into the St. Jude's 11. 11 boys disappeared. If you know something, you have a moral obligation to speak. Cole invoked the morality deliberately. Jory had worked on sacred ground for decades. He understood the weight of the truth. Jory's resistance crumbled. He slumped against the doorframe, looking suddenly exhausted, defeated. They'll kill me. If they know I talked to you, they'll kill me. Who will kill you? Cole asked, his voice gentle. Them? The ones who bought the silence? The ones who orchestrated the burial? Cole moved closer, his tone softening. I can protect you, Jory. I can get you into protective custody, but you have to tell me the truth. All of it. Jory looked at him, his eyes filled with tears, the fear receding, replaced by a desperate need for confession. I'm dying, Agent Pascoe. Cancer, late stage. The doctors give me months. I can't go to my grave with this on my conscience. I can't face God with this lie on my soul. He invited Cole inside. The cabin was sparse, cluttered, the air thick with the smell of sickness and wood smoke. Jory sat at the small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. I sent the letter, he confessed, his voice trembling. I had to tell someone before it was too late. Tell me about the burial, Cole urged, sitting opposite him. It was rushed, Jory recounted, the memories flooding back. Late in the afternoon, almost dusk. The diocese officials were there, Monsignor Davies and Father Thomas, and 2 other men. Who were they? I don't know. They weren't clergy. They wore expensive suits, dark suits. They seemed to be in charge. The monsignors deferred to them. What happened? They brought the casket in a hearse. They insisted on overseeing the interment personally. I was operating the backhoe when I lifted the casket to lower it into the vault. He paused, taking a shaky breath, the memory still vivid. It was too light. Far too light. How light? A casket like that, metal, heavy, it should weigh hundreds of pounds, even empty. But this one, it felt like nothing, like it was made of paper. I knew right away something was wrong. I knew there was no body inside. Did you say anything? Did you question them? I tried. I asked Monsignor Davies if there was a mistake. He told me to do my job and keep my mouth shut. Later that night, one of the men in the suits came to my house. He threatened you? He gave me an envelope full of cash, $10,000, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. He told me I saw nothing, heard nothing. He said if I ever spoke of it, they would bury me in that cemetery. For real. Cole absorbed the information. The presence of the unknown men confirmed an outside party was involved, one with significant resources and influence. The diocese hadn't acted alone. They were complicit, bought and paid for. The men in the suits? Cole asked, his focus narrowing. Did you notice anything specific about them? Anything that stood out? A face, a detail, anything? Jory closed his eyes, concentrating, reaching back into the recesses of his memory. It was a long time ago, and I was terrified. But one of them, the one who gave me the money, he wore a ring. What kind of ring? A heavy signet ring. Gold, with an unusual symbol. I remember it catching the light. A snake, a stylized serpent coiled around a crescent moon. The description was specific, unique, a tangible lead, a symbol that represented the organization behind the conspiracy. Did you hear them say anything? Cole pressed. Any names, locations? Anything that might help us identify them? Jory shook his head. They were careful. They spoke in hushed tones. But I did hear one thing. When they were leaving, one of them said, "The sanctuary is secure. The shepherd will be pleased." The sanctuary. The shepherd. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. A cult, a leader, a place where secrets were kept, where victims were hidden. Cole knew Jory was a critical witness. His testimony could break the case wide open, but it also put him in immense danger. The people who orchestrated this conspiracy were still out there, and they had already proven their willingness to protect their secrets. "Jory," Cole said, his voice firm, "I need you to come with me. I'm placing you in protective custody. We need to get you out of here. Now." Jory nodded, resigned, relieved. He gathered a few belongings, his movements slow, deliberate. As they left the cabin, Jory paused, looking back at the mountains, the place where he had hidden for decades. Cole could see the fear returning to his eyes, the realization of the danger he was facing. He placed a reassuring hand on Jory's shoulder. "I won't let anything happen to you," Cole promised. He didn't know if he could keep that promise, but he had to try. The symbol, a serpent coiled around a crescent moon, and the name Sanctuary were Cole's first concrete leads. Back at the field office, he initiated a search across multiple databases, looking for organizations using that name or iconography. The results were frustratingly vague. There were dozens of spiritualist groups, New Age retreats, and defunct cults that used similar imagery. Nothing stood out as a current, active threat with the resources to orchestrate a decades-long conspiracy. The sanctuary remained hidden, elusive, but the threat was real. Jory Lasco was the proof. Cole arranged for deputy marshals to handle the protective custody. Jory was too important to risk using standard FBI transport protocols. He needed the highest level of security. Cole insisted on overseeing the transfer personally. He briefed the marshals on the potential threat level, emphasizing the sophistication of the opposition. These weren't common criminals. They were organized, well-funded, and ruthless. The transfer was scheduled for dusk. The plan was to move Jory to a secure safe house in a neighboring state, using a decoy route to avoid surveillance. Cole followed the marshal's sedan in a separate vehicle, a nondescript SUV equipped with reinforced armor and specialized communication gear. He maintained a discreet distance, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the rearview mirror, the surrounding landscape. An uneasy feeling settled over him, a primal instinct warning him of the impending danger. The isolation of the mountain roads felt oppressive, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. They were on a deserted stretch of highway, dense forest pressing in on both sides. The light was fading rapidly, the world dissolving into shades of gray and purple. The marshal's car was a few hundred yards ahead, its taillights glowing red in the gloom. It happened incredibly fast, a sudden movement in the periphery of his vision, a dark shape emerging from the woods. A large utility van, dark blue, accelerated rapidly from a hidden access road, swerving across the highway, positioning itself directly in the path of the marshal's car. Cole slammed on his brakes, his tactical instincts taking over. "Jonas, we have contact. Ambush!" He barked into his radio, though he knew the signal was weak in this remote area, the connection tenuous. The marshal driving the sedan reacted instantly, swerving to avoid the van. But the van mirrored the movement, intentionally causing a collision. The impact was violent, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the trees. The sedan spun off the road, crashing into the ditch, the airbags deploying with explosive force. The utility van stopped broadside across the highway, blocking the road, creating a barricade. Cole stopped his SUV diagonally, using the engine block as cover. He drew his weapon, peering over the hood, his heart pounding in his chest. Two men exited the van. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks, and armed with automatic weapons. They moved with military precision, their movements fluid, coordinated. They opened fire on the wrecked sedan. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening, the muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness. The windows of the sedan shattered, the metal tearing under the onslaught. Cole returned fire, aiming for center mass. The distance was significant, the light fading, the targets moving. He fired controlled bursts, the recoil kicking against his shoulder. He saw one of the attackers stumble, hit in the shoulder or the arm. But the other continued to advance on the sedan, firing relentlessly. The marshals in the sedan were trapped, injured. Cole could hear their cries of pain over the sporadic radio static, their voices desperate, overwhelmed. Cole realized he had to close the distance. He had to draw the fire away from the sedan to protect Jory. He sprinted from the cover of his SUV, firing as he moved, a desperate gamble to shift the focus of the attack. The wounded attacker turned his attention to Cole, unleashing a barrage of bullets. Cole dove behind a large oak tree, the bark exploding around him, the splinters stinging his face. The sound of the gunfire was deafening, the smell of cordite thick in the air. He peered around the trunk, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The second attacker had reached the sedan. He ripped open the back door, the metal groaning in protest. Cole broke cover again, desperate to stop him. He fired 3 rounds, the shots precise, aimed at the attacker's legs. The attacker flinched, stumbled, but continued his objective. He dragged Jory Lasko from the wreckage. Jory was conscious, terrified, struggling weakly against the attacker's grip. The wounded attacker provided covering fire, forcing Cole back behind the tree, the bullets pinning him down. The second attacker shoved Jory into the utility van and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, the tires screeching on the asphalt. Cole sprinted toward the van, ignoring the bullets snapping past him. He aimed at the tires, but the van was already moving, accelerating rapidly. It swerved around Cole's SUV and disappeared down the highway, the taillights swallowed by the darkness. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the damaged engine and the faint sound of the retreating van. Cole stood in the middle of the road, his chest heaving, the weight of the failure crushing him. He had failed. He had lost Jory. He rushed to the sedan. The 2 deputy marshals were severely wounded, bleeding profusely, but alive. He administered first aid, applying pressure to the wounds, stabilizing them until backup arrived. Then he turned his attention to the wounded attacker. The man was lying on the asphalt, gasping for breath, his mask discarded beside him. Cole knelt beside him, his weapon trained on the man's chest. "Who are you?" Cole demanded, his voice cold, ruthless. "Where did they take him? Where is the sanctuary?" The man didn't answer. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, the life fading from them. His breath hitched, then stopped. He was dead. Cole searched the body, looking for any clue, any identification. There was no ID, no wallet, no phone. The man's fingerprints were professionally burned off, the skin scarred and smooth. These were professionals, ghosts. But they had made one mistake, a small oversight, a detail missed in the meticulous planning. Cole pulled back the collar of the man's tactical shirt. There, on the side of his neck, was a small, crude tattoo, a serpent coiled around a crescent moon. The symbol was real. The sanctuary was real. And they were organized, ruthless, and willing to kill to protect their secrets. The attack confirmed the scope of the conspiracy. They knew Jory was talking. They knew where he was, which meant they had eyes and ears everywhere, possibly even inside the Bureau or the Marshal's Service. The investigation had just become infinitely more dangerous. Cole looked down the empty highway, the darkness swallowing the road. They had Jory, and Cole had nothing but a symbol, a name, and the agonizing realization that he was fighting a war against an invisible enemy. The abduction of Jory Lasko was a devastating blow. It confirmed the existence of a vast, active conspiracy, one with the resources and reach to intercept a federal transport. The attack wasn't just about silencing a witness. It was a declaration of war. Cole knew the key to finding the sanctuary lay within the diocese. The officials who orchestrated the fake burial in 1980 were the link between Father Vasile and the unknown organization. He needed their names, their connections. He needed to understand how the silence was bought. The bishop's obstruction meant official channels were useless. A subpoena would take weeks, maybe months, time Cole didn't have. Jory was missing, presumed dead. The saint. Jude's 11 remained lost. Cole decided to take an unofficial route. He needed access to the diocese financial records from 1980. If the silence was bought, there had to be a money trail. The records were kept in a secure archive facility located in the basement of the diocesan headquarters. He contacted a former colleague in the FBI cybercrime unit, a man named Reese, who owed Cole a favor. Cole asked for blueprints and security details for the archive facility. Reese delivered, providing schematics of the building, the layout of the archive, and the specs of the security system. The system was archaic, relying on outdated alarms and physical locks, but the facility was guarded 24/7 by private security. Cole spent 2 days planning the infiltration. He observed the building, noting the security patrols, the shift changes. He equipped himself with lock-picking tools, a portable scanner, and a silenced weapon. He knew that if he was caught, his career was over, but the stakes were too high to play by the rules. He executed the break-in late at night. He approached the building from the rear, scaling a wrought iron fence. He bypassed the exterior alarm using a frequency jammer. He picked the lock on the service entrance, the tumblers clicking softly in the silence. He moved through the darkened corridors of the diocesan headquarters, the marble floors cold beneath his feet. The air was still, heavy with the scent of incense and old paper. He descended the stairs to the basement, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. The archive facility was secured by a heavy metal door with a keypad lock. Cole used the codes provided by Reese to bypass the keypad. The door hissed open. He entered the archive. The room was vast, filled with rows of metal shelving units stacked high with dusty ledgers and file boxes. The air was dry, temperature controlled. He navigated the aisles, searching for the financial records from 1980. The organization was meticulous. He found the section dedicated to that year. He pulled the heavy ledgers from the shelves, placing them on a nearby table. He began scanning the entries, the portable scanner humming softly. The ledgers detailed the diocese's finances, donations, expenditures, investments. It was tedious work, hours passing in the silence of the archive. He was halfway through the third ledger when he found it, a massive anonymous donation made to the diocese exactly 3 days before Father Vasilei's death. The amount was staggering, millions of dollars. It wasn't just a donation, it was a payment, the price of silence, the funding for the cover-up. Cole photographed the entries, ensuring the details were clear. The donation was routed through a complex series of transactions designed to obscure the source. But the origin point was listed, a holding company with a generic name. He had what he needed. He replaced the ledgers, ensuring they were exactly as he found them. He started toward the exit. That's when he heard it. Footsteps in the corridor outside. A security patrol. Cole froze, melting into the shadows between the shelving units. He drew his silenced weapon, controlling his breathing. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped outside the archive door. Cole heard the rattle of keys. The door opened. A security guard stepped inside, shining his flashlight into the darkness. He swept the beam across the room, the light passing over Cole's hiding spot. Cole remained motionless, his finger resting on the trigger. The guard stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. Then, seemingly satisfied, the guard closed the door. The lock clicked shut. Cole waited until the footsteps faded away before moving. He exited the archive, his heart pounding in his chest. He retraced his steps through the building, the darkness now feeling oppressive, threatening. He reached the service entrance and slipped out into the night air. He scaled the fence and disappeared into the shadows. He had the evidence, the money trail, the connection between the diocese and the organization that took Jory. Now he needed to follow the money and find out who paid the price of silence. The generic holding company was his next target, and he knew this time they wouldn't just rely on lawyers and canonical law to stop him. The photographs of the ledger entries were damning. The massive influx of cash into the diocese coffers just before Vasilei's staged death was the smoking gun Cole needed. He initiated a forensic accounting deep dive into the donation, tasking Reese and his cybercrime contacts with unraveling the complex web of transactions. The money trail was deliberately obfuscated, routed through multiple shell corporations, offshore accounts, and holding companies. It was a sophisticated operation designed to launder the funds and hide the source. But Reese was tenacious. After 48 hours of intensive work, he managed to trace the origin of the funds. The source was Hallowed Holdings Group, a private equity firm known for its secrecy and aggressive acquisition strategies. They operated in the upper echelons of the financial world, dealing in billions of dollars. Cole researched Hallowed Holdings. They kept a low profile, their operations opaque. They specialized in acquiring distressed assets, turning them around, and selling them for massive profits. But there was something unsettling about their portfolio. They seemed to have a particular interest in acquiring religious organizations, retreat centers, and children's charities. The registered address for Hallowed Holdings was a high-rise office building in the heart of the financial district. Cole decided to pay them a visit. He couldn't go in as an FBI agent. The forensic accounting was based on illegally obtained evidence. He needed to get a look at their operations, to gauge their reaction to pressure. He dressed in a sharp suit, adopting the persona of an auditor investigating generalized corporate fraud. He entered the building, the lobby a cavernous space of chrome and glass. He took the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened to the Hallowed Holdings office. The space was sterile, minimalist. The decor was monochromatic, the lighting subdued. It felt less like an office and more like a high-end clinic. A single receptionist sat behind a large, imposing desk. She was impeccably dressed, her expression unnervingly calm. "Welcome to Hallowed Holdings," she greeted him, her voice smooth, practiced. "How may I help you?" "I'm here to conduct an audit," Cole said, presenting his forged credentials. "We've flagged some irregularities in your recent acquisitions." The receptionist examined the credentials, her expression unchanging. "Of course. If you'll just have a seat, I will inform the managing director of your arrival." She excused herself, disappearing through a door behind the desk. Cole sat in one of the minimalist chairs, observing the office. Something was wrong. The office was too quiet. There were no phones ringing, no sounds of typing. The desks visible from the reception area were empty, devoid of personal effects. No files, no papers. They were too clean. He noticed a small concealed security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, the lens aimed directly at him. He realized he had walked into a trap. They knew who he was. They were waiting for him. The realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. The abduction of Jory, the attack on the marshals. They were monitoring him. They knew about the break-in at the diocese archive. He stood, moving toward the elevator. He needed to get out of there. The door behind the reception desk opened. Two men emerged. They were not office workers. They were dressed in tactical gear, similar to the attackers on the highway. They moved with the same lethal efficiency. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Their intent was clear. Cole drew his weapon, but he knew he was outgunned. The men raised their weapons. Cole dove behind the reception desk, the marble exploding as bullets ripped through the air. He returned fire, aiming for the gaps in their body armor. The fight was brutal, close quarters. The confined space amplified the sound of gunfire. Cole used the environment to his advantage, utilizing the minimalist furniture as cover. He managed to wound one of the attackers, hitting him in the leg. The man collapsed, screaming in pain. The second attacker advanced on Cole, his weapon firing relentlessly. Cole was pinned down, the desk shredding under the onslaught. He saw an opening. He lunged from behind the desk, tackling the attacker. They crashed into a glass partition, the glass shattering around them. They struggled on the floor, grappling for control of the weapon. Cole managed to wrest the gun from the attacker's grasp. He struck the man with the butt of the weapon, knocking him unconscious. He scrambled to his feet, his suit torn, his body bruised. He looked around the wrecked office. The alarm was blaring, the sound deafening. He knew he had minutes before security arrived. He rushed to the elevator, jamming the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside, the doors closing just as two security guards emerged from the stairwell. He escaped the building, disappearing into the crowded streets of the financial district. The confrontation confirmed his suspicions. Hallowed Holdings wasn't just a financial entity, it was the organizational arm of the sanctuary. They were sophisticated, well-funded, and deeply embedded in the fabric of society. And they were willing to kill to protect their operations. Cole knew he had just kicked the hornet's nest. He needed to identify the head of Hallowed Holdings, the person pulling the strings, the shepherd mentioned in Jory's letter, the one who bought the silence of the church and the lives of 11 boys. The name surfaced quickly once Cole knew where to look. The CEO and founder of Hallowed Holdings Group was a man named Oakhart Hallowell. Hallowell was a known figure in the financial world, but extremely reclusive. A billionaire philanthropist, he rarely gave interviews or made public appearances. His public image was meticulously crafted, presenting him as a visionary investor with a deep commitment to social causes. Cole delved into Hallowell's background. The man had built his empire from nothing, starting with a small investment firm in the late 1970s. His rise was meteoric, his wealth accumulating rapidly. He donated vast sums to children's charities, religious organizations, and humanitarian efforts worldwide. He sat on the boards of museums, universities, and hospitals. His public image was impeccable, a saint in a world of sinners. But Cole knew the truth. The philanthropy was a facade, a veil hiding the darkness beneath. Hallowell was the leader of the sanctuary, the organization that used the serpent and crescent moon symbol, the organization that employed paramilitary forces and orchestrated the abduction of Jory Lasco. The realization was horrifying. Hallowell's philanthropy wasn't just a cover. It was a mechanism for access to potential victims, access to influence within powerful circles. The donations to the diocese were just one example of his reach. Cole connected the dots. Father Vasile hadn't just run away. He hadn't just faked his death. He had sold the saint, Jude's 11, to Hallowell. The timeline matched. Hallowell's rise began around the same time as the disappearance. The massive donation to the diocese was the payment for the boys and the price of the church's silence. Cole initiated surveillance on Hallowell's known estate, a sprawling compound in upstate New York. The property was heavily fortified. Cole compiled his findings, the ledger entries, the attack on the marshals, the confrontation at Hallowed Holdings, the connection to Hallowell. He presented the evidence to Jonas Bridger. Jonas was stunned by the scope of the conspiracy. He recognized the gravity of the situation. He immediately took the evidence to the FBI leadership, pushing for a warrant to raid Hallowell's estate. The response was not what Cole expected. The FBI leadership was hesitant. Oakhart Hallowell was a powerful man with deep political connections and immense wealth. The evidence Cole presented was compelling, but much of it was circumstantial or obtained through unauthorized methods, the break-in at the diocese archive, the illegal forensic accounting. They argued that a raid on Hallowell's estate would have massive repercussions. If they were wrong, the fallout would be catastrophic. They ordered Cole to stand down. Cole was furious. Stand down? We have evidence of a decades-long conspiracy, kidnapping, murder, corruption. We have a witness missing, presumed dead. We have 2 deputy marshals in the hospital. I know, Cole, Jonas said, his voice tight with frustration. But the director is afraid. Hallowell has friends in high places. They are demanding irrefutable proof before they authorize any action. Irrefutable proof? What more do they need? They need something concrete linking Hallowell to the saint. Jude's 11, something that can't be dismissed as coincidence or fabrication. The meeting ended with Cole being officially suspended, pending an internal investigation into his unauthorized activities. Cole was isolated, cut off from the resources of the FBI. He realized the sanctuary's influence might reach even inside the Bureau, or at least the bureaucracy was too afraid to act. He was on his own. He sat in his apartment, the silence heavy. He looked at the photograph of the saint. Jude's 11 boys, betrayed by the priest they trusted, sold to a monster hiding behind a mask of philanthropy. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't walk away. He knew that if he didn't act, the truth would remain buried forever. The investigation was stalled. Cole, officially sidelined, couldn't disconnect. He knew he had to keep Roisin Gabler informed. He met her at a small diner. He laid out the truth, the identification of Oakhart Hallowell, the vast reach of the sanctuary, and the FBI's refusal to act. Roisin listened, the familiar mask of weary resignation settling over her face. "So that's it then," she said, her voice flat. "They win." "Not yet," Cole said. "I'm not giving up. But I need you to be careful. Hallowell is dangerous." Roisin nodded, but Cole could see a flicker of something else in her eyes, a desperate resolve. A few days later, Roisin was sitting in her living room. She stared at the photograph of her sons. 26 years of waiting. She couldn't bear the thought of another day of inaction. She remembered something Cole had mentioned, an upstate New York address linked to one of Hallowed Holdings's early acquisitions. A retreat center. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all she had. She packed a small bag and started driving. The address led her to a remote area in the Adirondack Mountains. The retreat center was located at the end of a long, winding road. It was a large, imposing structure. The entrance was heavily secured. A security guard stood watch. Roisin parked her car and approached the gate, posing as someone interested in booking a spiritual retreat. The guard was polite but firm. The center was closed for a private event. She retreated to her car. But as she was about to leave, she noticed something, a small symbol incorporated into the retreat center's signage. The serpent and the crescent moon. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the sanctuary. She grabbed her phone. She had to document this. She started taking photos of the entrance, the signage. She didn't notice the security guards approaching her car until it was too late. They appeared silently, surrounding the vehicle. They recognized her. Cole had noticed the surveillance at the Hallowed Holdings office. They knew who she was. They opened the car door, dragging her out. She struggled, screaming, but they subdued her quickly. They seized her phone. She managed to make one last desperate attempt. As they were dragging her towards the retreat center, she managed to dial Cole's number on her smartwatch. The call connected. She couldn't speak, but she hoped the microphone would pick up the sounds of the struggle. "We have the woman," one of the guards said, his voice muffled. "The mother?" Cole heard the muffled sounds, the struggle, the fear in Roisin's breathing. He recognized the location from his research. He knew immediately what had happened. Roisin had gone there alone, and they had taken her. He grabbed his gear. He had to get to her before the sanctuary silenced her forever. Cole raced towards the retreat center. He was acting outside the law, a suspended agent operating on his own authority. But he didn't care. He reached the retreat center late at night. He parked his car deep in the woods, approaching the perimeter on foot. He breached the perimeter fence, bypassing the security systems. He moved quickly, silently, through the shadows. He infiltrated the main building. He navigated the corridors, searching for Roisin. He found her in a basement storage room, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. She was unharmed. He cut her bonds. "We have to move," he whispered. They were escaping the basement when they were confronted by two guards. Cole engaged them immediately, the fight brutal and silent. He disabled the first guard. The second guard lunged at him. Cole blocked the blow. They grappled in the narrow corridor. Cole managed to wrestle the baton away, using it against the guard. He subdued the guard and turned to Roisin. And then he froze. He got a clear look at the guard's face, a man in his late 30s, his expression hard and cold. Cole felt a jolt of recognition, a sickening realization that twisted in his gut. He mentally compared the face to the 1980 photograph. It was Weston Nolan, one of the St. Jude's 11. Older, hardened, but undeniably him. The revelation hit Cole with the force of a physical blow. Weston Nolan was alive, but he wasn't a captive. He was a guard, a perpetrator. The horrifying reality crashed down on him. Some of the boys might still be alive, but they were not victims. They had become the victimizers. The indoctrination, the abuse, the decades of isolation. It had twisted them, transformed them into the monsters who had abducted them. Cole looked at Weston, searching for any sign of the boy he had been, but the eyes that stared back at him were empty. "Let's go," Cole said to Roisin, his voice hollow. They escaped the retreat center, disappearing into the woods. The revelation had shaken Cole to his core. The sanctuary wasn't just a cult, it was a system that devoured innocent lives and regurgitated them as instruments of its own evil. He had to find the core of the organization, the place where Oakhart Hallowell reigned supreme. The encounter with Weston Nolan illuminated the true scope of the sanctuary. The retreat center was just a satellite location. Cole knew he had to find the core. He and Roisin went into hiding. He secured her in a remote motel. Cole used his resources to track Hallowell's movements. He focused on Hallowell's early acquisitions. He identified a massive property in a remote wilderness area of the Pacific Northwest, purchased by Hallowell 30 years ago. The property was located deep within the Cascade Mountains. Satellite imagery revealed a large, heavily secured compound hidden within the dense forest. This was it, the sanctuary, the place where Hallowell had taken the saint. Jude's 11. Cole knew a raid was impossible. Given the leaks within the Bureau, any official action would be compromised. He had to go alone, to infiltrate the compound, find proof of Hallowell's crimes, and locate Vasily and the other boys. It was a suicide mission, but he had no other choice. He said goodbye to Roisin. He traveled to the Pacific Northwest, equipping himself with tactical gear, specialized surveillance equipment, and explosives. He was ready, prepared to face the darkness. The journey into the wilderness was arduous, but Cole pushed forward, driven by a relentless determination. He was an army of one, fighting a war against an invisible enemy. The approach to the compound was grueling. Cole hiked for 2 days through the dense wilderness. He moved with caution, aware that the sanctuary might have patrols monitoring the area. He reached the perimeter of the compound on the 3rd day. The defenses were sophisticated. A high metal fence, topped with razor wire. Motion sensors, thermal cameras, and armed patrols with dogs secured the perimeter. Cole established an observation post on a ridge overlooking the compound. He spent the next 2 days observing the activity. The compound was a self-sufficient village, organized and disciplined. People moved around in uniform attire, their movements purposeful and controlled. And then he saw them, the children. New children, boys and girls. They were marched in formation, their expressions vacant. The cycle was continuing. The sanctuary was still active, still kidnapping children. The sight filled Cole with a cold rage. He focused his attention on the central building. He observed the leadership. He saw Weston Nolan overseeing the training of the new children. He identified another survivor, a man in his late 30s with a fanatical intensity in his eyes. Cole recognized him from the 1980 photograph. Eris Keene. The survivors had become the jailers. The abused had become the abusers. Cole documented everything. He had the proof he needed. But the proof was not enough. He had to rescue the children. He had to confront the leaders of the sanctuary. He needed a plan. The reconnaissance had provided him with the intelligence he needed. Now it was time to act. Cole needed to understand the leadership structure. He needed to identify the immediate threat. He used specialized equipment to intercept the compound's radio traffic. He managed to break the code. The communications were coded using religious terminology. They referred to the leader as the shepherd, Hallowell, and they mentioned another figure, the vicar, the second in command. Cole focused his surveillance on the central building. He observed the activity on the balcony. He saw Hallowell, the shepherd, meeting with another man. Hallowell was older, his demeanor regal and imposing. The second man turned. Cole felt a shock of recognition, a wave of nausea. It was Father Theron Vasile, older, graying, but unmistakably him. He was the vicar. For Cole, as a Catholic, this was the ultimate betrayal. Vasile didn't just sell the boys, he joined the cult. He rose through the ranks, becoming the spiritual architect of the indoctrination. The realization galvanized Cole. He had to stop them. He intercepted another communication, a message about an upcoming ascension ceremony for the new children. It was scheduled for the next night. The ascension ceremony, the final stage of the indoctrination process, the moment when the children's wills were broken, their identities erased. He knew he had to act immediately. He had 24 hours to infiltrate the compound, rescue the children, and stop the ceremony. The imminent threat of the ascension ceremony forced Cole's hand. He knew what such rituals entailed, a horrific blend of psychological torture, physical abuse, and forced drugging. But the dilemma was paralyzing. If he called for help, the leaks might alert Hallowell. Any premature alert would likely trigger a mass suicide or the execution of the captives. He had to stop the ceremony from the inside. Cole formulated a desperate plan. He needed a massive diversion to infiltrate the central building and extract the children. He analyzed the reconnaissance data. The weak point was the main power station located outside the perimeter fence. If he could disable it, he could cut the electricity, neutralizing the electronic surveillance. But he also needed backup. He made a risky move. He used a satellite phone to send an encrypted message to Jonas Bridger. The message contained everything: the coordinates, the evidence, the threat of the ceremony. He instructed Jonas to have a hostage rescue team mobilized and ready, but only move in on his explicit signal. The message sent, Cole waited. Jonas Bridger received the message. The evidence was undeniable. Cole had been right. He made a decision. He mobilized the hostage rescue team, bypassing the official authorization channels. He trusted Cole's judgment. Cole received the confirmation message from Jonas. Team ready, awaiting signal. He wasn't alone. He prepared his gear. He accepted the personal cost of his actions, the realization that this might be his last night on Earth. He looked at the photograph of the saint. Jude's 11 one last time. The desperate gambit was in motion. Under the cover of a moonless night, Cole approached the compound. He moved with practiced stealth. He reached the main power station. He bypassed the security fence, disabling the alarms. He placed the explosives, setting the timer for 5 minutes. He retreated to the perimeter fence, waiting for the diversion. The explosion ripped through the silence. The power station erupted in a fireball. The compound plunged into darkness. The electronic surveillance, all neutralized. The chaos erupted immediately. Alarms blared and guards mobilized, converging on the power station. Cole scaled the fence, dropping silently onto the compound grounds. He moved quickly, using the chaos and darkness to his advantage. He infiltrated the central building. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination. The interior was a disturbing blend of luxury and austere religious devotion. The walls were adorned with the unsettling symbol of the serpent and the crescent moon. He navigated the corridors, searching for the main hall. He heard voices, chanting, a rhythmic drumming. He followed the sound. He reached the main hall, the doors closed, the light flickering underneath. He paused, taking a deep breath. He drew his weapon. He kicked open the doors. He stepped inside, entering the inner sanctum of the sanctuary, the heart of the darkness. The scene was a tableau of horror, a twisted mockery of faith illuminated by candlelight. The main hall was a vast space. The air was thick with incense. At the center stood a large stone altar adorned with the symbol of the serpent and the crescent moon. Oakhart Hallowell and Father Theron Vasile presided over the ceremony, dressed in elaborate vestments. Hallowell, the shepherd, radiated an aura of absolute authority. Vasile, the vicar, stood beside him, his expression ecstatic. The new children were kneeling before the altar, their bodies trembling. They were drugged, terrified. Adult members of the sanctuary surrounded them. Weston Nolan and Eris Keene stood among them, their expressions devoid of emotion. Cole witnessed the ceremony, the abuse disguised as religious ritual. Vasile was anointing the children with oil. Hallowell was preparing a large chalice. The ascension ceremony was reaching its climax. Cole interrupted the ceremony, emerging from the shadows, his weapon drawn. "It's over," he announced, his voice ringing through the silent hall. The chanting stopped abruptly. Hallowell and Vasile reacted with an unnerving calm. "Agent Pascoe," Hallowell said, his voice smooth. "We've been expecting you." He stepped down from the altar. "You misunderstand us. The sanctuary is not a prison. It is a refuge. We saved these children from a corrupt world." "You kidnap them. You abuse them," Cole countered. "We enlighten them," Vasile interjected, his voice trembling with religious fervor. "We show them the truth." He looked at Cole, his eyes burning. "I found true enlightenment here. Outside the constraints of the church, I found my true calling." "Your calling is a lie," Cole said. "You betrayed those boys." "I saved them," Vasile screamed. "I brought them to the sanctuary." The adult members started to move, surrounding Cole. He was trapped, outnumbered. The standoff tightened. The silence was absolute. Cole stood his ground, his weapon raised, his eyes locked on Hallowell. The final confrontation had begun. The standoff shattered. Hallowell gave a subtle nod, and the adult members lunged at Cole. The hall erupted into violence. Cole fought desperately. The fight was brutal, chaotic, the flickering candlelight casting distorted shadows. The cult members fought with a fanatical intensity. Cole disabled them one by one, but they kept coming. Vasile, enraged, grabbed a ceremonial dagger from the altar and attacked him. "Blasphemer!" he screamed, lunging at Cole. Cole defended himself. They grappled before the altar. In the struggle, Cole managed to wrestle the dagger away, the blade cutting deep into Vasile's side. The priest staggered back, clutching his wound. He collapsed onto the altar, his blood staining the white stone. Cole turned back to the fight, realizing he was surrounded by Weston Nolan and Eris Keene. He was forced to fight them, the boys he had sworn to find. "Weston! Eris!" he shouted, trying to reach them. "Hallowell is a monster! He lied to you!" Eris Keene reacted with a fanatical rage, attacking Cole with a relentless fury. But Weston Nolan hesitated. A flicker of something crossed his face. Doubt, fear, a glimpse of the boy he had been. Eris saw the hesitation. "Traitor!" he screamed, turning his attack on Weston. Cole used the internal conflict to his advantage. He incapacitated Eris with a swift blow. He turned to Weston, the boy staring at him with a mixture of terror and confusion. Hallowell, seeing his control slipping, made a desperate move. He grabbed one of the children, a young boy, holding him as a hostage. He retreated towards a hidden passage behind the altar. "Stay back!" he shouted, pressing the ceremonial dagger against the boy's throat. "Stay back or he dies!" He disappeared into the passage. Cole didn't hesitate. He raced after him, plunging into the darkness. Cole pursued Hallowell into the dark, narrow passage. The passage led to a network of tunnels beneath the compound. Hallowell knew the layout intimately. He moved quickly, dragging the terrified child with him. Cole followed closely behind. "Let him go, Hallowell," Cole shouted. "It's over." "It's never over," Hallowell shouted back. "The sanctuary is eternal." He used the child as a shield, threatening his life, stalling Cole's advance. They reached a central chamber. Hallowell was cornered. A tense negotiation ensued. Cole tried to reason with Hallowell. "You've lost. Let the boy go, and this ends peacefully." "Peacefully?" Hallowell laughed. "There is no peace for me." only victory or oblivion. He pressed the dagger against the boy's throat. Cole realized reasoning wouldn't work. He used Hallowell's arrogance against him. He lowered his weapon, adopting a posture of defeat. "You're right," Cole said. "You built an empire. No one can take that away from you." Hallowell hesitated, his ego momentarily overriding his desperation. He relaxed his grip on the dagger. That was the opening Cole needed. He moved with lightning speed, tackling Hallowell. The dagger flew out of Hallowell's hand. Cole rescued the child, shoving him towards the tunnel entrance. "Run!" He overpowered Hallowell, the billionaire fighting with a desperate fury, but Cole was stronger. He subdued Hallowell, binding him with zip ties. The shepherd was defeated. Cole activated his emergency beacon, giving the signal to Jonas. Moments later, the sound of helicopters filled the air. The FBI hostage rescue team descended on the compound. The long night was finally over. The arrival of the FBI HRT transformed the compound from a battlefield into a secured crime scene. The tactical team moved with precision, arresting the remaining cult members. The rescued children received immediate medical attention. The FBI began the grim process of searching the compound. They found evidence of the decades-long conspiracy: records, photographs, financial documents. The search revealed the horrifying truth of the organization. They found hidden chambers, dungeons where the children were subjected to torture and abuse. And then they found the graveyard, a hidden graveyard located in a secluded area of the compound, dozens of unmarked graves. The forensic team began the agonizing process of exhuming the bodies. The remains of numerous victims were found. Cole realized this was where Jory Lasco likely ended up, and this was where most of the St. Jude's 11 had been buried, the boys who had resisted the indoctrination. The survivors were few. Father Vasile was found dead in the main hall. Weston Nolan was taken into custody, his expression vacant, his mind shattered. He seemed broken from his conditioning. Eris Keene was also arrested, still defiant, still clinging to the ideology of the sanctuary. Jonas Bridger found Cole in the tunnels, standing over Oakhart Hallowell. Cole was wounded, exhausted, but alive. "You did it, Cole," Jonas said. "You brought them down." Cole nodded, the weight of the victory settling on him. Jonas acknowledged Cole's extraordinary actions, knowing the bureaucratic fight ahead. Cole had acted outside the law, but he had done the right thing, and Jonas would stand by him. The aftermath at the compound was a scene of both devastation and hope. The darkness had been exposed, the monsters defeated, but the scars remained. Cole spent the next few weeks recovering in the hospital. He was debriefed by the FBI, his actions scrutinized. But the evidence he had gathered, the lives he had saved, vindicated him. But the victory felt hollow. The faces of the saint. Jude's 11 haunted him. He had one last duty to perform. He returned to Pennsylvania to meet Roisin Gabler. He had to deliver the agonizing truth. He met her at her house. He sat across from her, the silence heavy. "We found them, Roisin," he said gently. Roisin looked at him, bracing herself for the inevitable blow. "Dalen and Eamon, they are deceased." Roisin closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "We identified their remains in the compound graveyard," Cole continued. "They resisted the indoctrination, Roisin. They fought back. They died early on." He told her about the sanctuary, the abuse, the indoctrination. He told her about Weston Nolan and Eris Keene. He told her about Father Vasile and Oakhart Hallowell. The meeting was heartbreaking. Roisin was devastated. But amidst the pain, there was a sense of closure. After 26 years, she finally had answers. "Thank you, Cole," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my sons home." Cole left her house, the weight of her grief settling on him. He visited St. Jude's Parish one last time. He struggled with his faith, the betrayal of Vasile, the horrors committed in the name of belief, the complicity of the diocese. It had shaken him to his core. But as he sat there, he found a renewed sense of purpose, not in the institution, but in the commitment to justice, to the protection of the innocent. His faith was not in the church, but in the inherent goodness of humanity, the resilience of the human spirit. He had faced the darkness, and he had emerged, scarred but unbroken. He had found his true calling. The exposure of the sanctuary sent shockwaves across the country. The trial of Oakhart Hallowell was a media spectacle. His vast fortune and political influence could not protect him from the overwhelming evidence and the testimony of the survivors. He was sentenced to life in prison. Weston Nolan and Eris Keene were also charged. Weston, undergoing intensive therapy, expressed deep remorse. He aided the prosecution. Eris Keene remained hardened. Both were sent to a high-security psychiatric facility. The investigation into the sanctuary revealed the extent of its influence. The leaks within the government that had led to Cole's suspension were exposed. The diocese officials involved in the 1980 cover-up were also exposed. They faced legal and canonical consequences. The aftermath of the sanctuary was a long and painful process of healing. The final scene took place at the cemetery where Father Vasile's empty coffin was exhumed. The empty grave had been filled in. Cole stood before the grave. He reflected on the darkness he had encountered, the lives lost, the innocents destroyed. He walked away, the autumn leaves crunching under his feet. He was a solitary figure, a silent guardian, committed to the fight against the shadows. The war against the darkness was never over, but he would be there, ready to face it.